All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. For those who may not have been here 2 weeks ago when I visited, my name is Justin Roth, and I'm one of the members of the Startup Week 2015 Student Organizing Committee. So it's great to see you all today. Thanks for coming out to participate in Rick's talk. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, Rick is our special guest speaker today, and he's the programmatic lead and co-founder of Bar Hoppers. He has over 10 years experience in digital media, spanning the client, publisher, agency, and data sides of the industry. And in his current role, he leads the programmatic sales efforts for Conde Nast, both globally and across all digital mediums. He attended Susquehanna University here in Pennsylvania and Birkbeck University of London. So I won't say too much. I'm going to turn it over to Rick for the rest of the session. I will note, though, that we'll have time for questions at the end. You're welcome to just raise your hand the standard way and ask those questions, but we also have a service we've set up where you can text in your questions for Rick. So if you're interested, I tried to write it up here on either side of the projector screen. If you can't read it, let me know. But the number to text to is 22333, and the format is IST startup, all one word, and then a space, and then whatever your question is. And I'll be able to pull those up and read them to Rick at the end of the session. So sound good? Yes. All right, so here's Rick. Enjoy the talk.
Great. Thank you very much. So I know the headline reads process automation. I'm gonna just scrap that and wing it, sort of. So I noticed when looking at the other speakers and stuff like that, advertising technology as an industry is not represented. So I figured I'd just keep it more macro level and just talk about ad tech, data, and how kind of, any comp sci major kind of ties into advertising these days. And again, kind of awkward talking about yourself, so bear with me. I'll kind of try to skip through that pretty quickly. But just a quick agenda. So I'll go through my background, kind of where I started, kind of the startups I worked for, successes and failures. So there was plenty of the latter. Kind of the marketing and advertising technology landscapes. So what that looks like, kind of the players in the space. The company I worked for, Datalogics, that was successful and did exit this past year. So they had a pretty hefty exit to Oracle. My new role at Conde Nast, and which is essentially a startup within a big company. So again, not your typical startup, but kind of a small division within a huge company. And then kind of trends in the industry, kind of the things that are, I guess, popping these days and coming up in advertising, and hopefully how that relates to you. So hopefully some of this is relevant for you. We'll see. And just, so as I said, kind of the opportunities, kind of the big players in the space, who's investing in this space, stuff like that. And as mentioned, feel free to raise your hand, ask questions at any time. Try to keep it conversational rather than just me droning on for however long. So my background, I came out of school. There was nothing kind of in this industry as far as majors went. There was no digital media minor or major or anything like that. I ended up working at a little social media company. Actually, a few of them jumped around. Most of them failed. They were crushed by, the obvious guys, Facebook, the usual suspects. And so, I learned a lot kind of on the, I guess, the fundamentals of tech as it relates to advertising. I wouldn't say I'm a developer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not a coder. I'm not a developer, but I did do kind of QA and ad trafficking and stuff like that, and that later evolved into kind of what I do now, which is running a team of both operations and sales. So it's kind of more of a executive management position. But yeah, like I said, I was with a few companies. You probably have never heard of any of these little sites, maybe DeviantArt. But most of these guys kind of got crushed by some of the larger players in the space these days. From there, I moved on to a company called Datalogics. It was an unknown business. They focused in direct mail, so kind of the ancient way of doing advertising. Essentially, they send those pamphlets that you get in the mailbox. It's kind of archaic and inefficient. So essentially, we pivoted the business to become more digitally savvy. Essentially, we were gathering data, so everything you buy transactionally is recorded. So we were gathering credit card data, we were gathering data from Walmart, from the US DMVs, and we basically pool all that data and then make it transactable online. So essentially, we can target users based on what you bought. So that's how Datalogix was kind of built. I was there for about 4 years. We were called Next Action when I showed up. I was the only employee in New York by myself. And so after about 4 years, I vested and left the company, but they were already on their way to an exit. So they were just sold to Oracle for $1.2 billion. So from there, I jumped over to a company called Conde Nast, and I'll kind of explain who they are if you haven't heard of them. But they're a big print company, focused on magazines. Some of the brands you may recognize, GQ, Vogue, etc. And so essentially my role there is to build out basically a small startup team within the company, focused on digital advertising, digital media, and what's called programmatic, and I'll explain what that is in a few minutes. And then, in addition to that, there's a project that I'm working on with this guy over here called Bar Hoppers. So for me, it's working for a big company like Conde is interesting, but it's more for experience. It's more to see if we can kind of pivot this company from print to digital. But really, I want to get back at the end of the day to kind of the small startup world that I was in before, whether it was successful or a complete failure. So this is a snapshot of the advertising technology landscape. It's a complete mess, but basically what I'm trying to illustrate here is that there are hundreds of companies that you've never heard of who all have venture capital funding, who all have private equity funding, and so essentially kind of painting the picture of the opportunity out here. So whether you're in data sciences, whether you're a PHP developer, it doesn't matter. All of these companies are looking for people like you. So essentially an industry that was dominated by the Mad Men style of thinking, which is just solely creative, is now becoming much more data oriented. So all of these companies, you'll see usual suspects in here, AT&T, Google, things like that, but there are a ton that you wouldn't recognize. Frankly, I don't know if I know all of them, but yeah, so this is kind of just a general snapshot of the advertising landscape. The company that I worked for, Datalogix, that was actually successful, as I mentioned, connects offline data online. So the way they did that was by gathering data, CRM data or purchase history data, right? So we were able to understand what you bought. We were able to understand from existing CRM databases who you are, and then essentially match you as an online cookie, right? Or a user ID. So essentially this is kind of like a little illustration of how the matching process works. And so this small company, it was about, I want to say, it was definitely under 100 people when I showed up. I believe now they're 400 something. But it was the core focus was data and data security. And essentially the reason why customers like American Express, Visa, Facebook was our biggest partner, worked with us was because of our modeling capabilities and data security. So just kind of illustrating what I did over there was to form strategic partnerships with companies that we already didn't work with. So all the guys that I showed here before, I had to go out to them and tell them why they should work with us. And so I worked a lot with engineering, product. We had our Scrum weekly. We had stand-ups, where people were at. So, again, not a developer, but I feel like I learned a lot on the data management and comp sci side of things. Again, this is an explanation of how Datalogix worked. So they run an advertising campaign, those cute little banners that you all see and love online. And then they're able to essentially tie back whether you bought something or not in the store. So it sounds a little big brothery, probably because it is. But whenever you get a credit card or sign up for a credit card, that data is being used for this purpose. So from there, I moved on to a company called Conde Nast. Conde Nast is, like I said, a huge magazine publication company. So you'll probably recognize a lot of these names up here. We also have a stake in Reddit, which you're familiar with, I'm sure. So, all of these titles, one thing they have in common is that they're really weren't digitally savvy a few years ago. And so now they need to pivot, right? Print is slowly kind of fading. And so these brands need to figure out how to become digitally relevant. So that's one of the things that my team helps with. We work with the web dev team. Our side is more ad sales and ad operations focused, because that's my background. But we're working, again, with all of these sites. They're redesigning themselves, to be more relevant in the digital age. We also have a hub that we've created for video called The Scene. We realized that there's a lot of money in TV, and it's wasted, and it's just kind of dumped into TV ads and things of that nature. You can't actually target the users the way you're supposed to. So by creating video content, we want to cut into those billions of dollars in TV. So we created something called The Scene, and we partner with Major League Soccer, PBS, other companies that aren't Conde Nast owned, the Weather Channel, to create kind of this one-stop shop hub for content. I have a quick video here, again, for those of you who don't know what Conde Nast is. I think this works, right? Pointer? Let's see if it works. It may not, because there's no sound. You guys got sound here? Yeah? Of the monitor?
No, on the screen itself.
Oh, of the screen. He said of the screen itself. You got it? Nah, we can skip it. It's not a big deal.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's totally cool. It's fine. We'll skip it.
Sound back?
Nah, we'll skip
Okay.
it. We'll skip it. We don't need it. We're good. Thank you. Although you did just jack up my mic. That's what you did. So that's fine. So kind of the focus within Conde, like I said, it's a startup within a bigger company. So my goal is to kind of get in, change things, and get out. Like I said, I want to kind of go back to, smaller kind of outfits and more startup-oriented businesses. But basically, I was hired to come in and kind of change the way that we do our digital ad sales, right? So essentially, the process that we're going to use is acquire our programmatic team, our digital talent, build our tech stack, choose the platforms from that giant list of different logos that you saw before, educate everyone within the company to be more digitally savvy and to be able to sell digital and speak to digital, et cetera, and then kind of assimilate my team into the greater company and then disappear. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do within the company. So like I said, again, kind of a startup environment within a bigger entity. We're responsible for programmatic media trading, something called audience extension. I can explain that in a minute. Application of data, how data is used in advertising, and then the management of our partner relationships. So partnerships like our Google relationship, our team manages the day-to-day with Google. We use a lot of their technology to kind of piggyback on top of. And then some advisory on the investments that we'll, as a company, move forward with to stay relevant in the digital space. So this is kind of how all of this stuff works. So when I said build tech stack, we're essentially choosing all these partners to work with, piecing them together, right? So we have operations and dev guys who are kind of making sure that we can plug into all these platforms, right? And that they all work together. And so our sites, Vogue, GQ, whatever, someone will go on that site, someone will see a banner ad. That banner ad will hit all of these different, essentially these different platforms. And then these platforms will determine, essentially the slot will hit these platforms, and then they'll determine what ad to serve you, right? So all of that happens in real time. So when you're loading the page, it's kicking back to all these systems to decide which ad to serve you based on a number of parameters, age, gender, what you've bought in the past, things of that nature. So like I said before, the space is changing in advertising, and it's not something that you'd think of right away when you think startups. You think a lot of consumer-oriented products, right? Things that help you day-to-day, apps that are interesting. Those are pretty much the first things you think of when you think startup, right? Something cool, Snapchat, Meerkat, whatever. But what's being talked about a lot in advertising is both data and automation. And so it terrifies some people who have been around forever. They're kind of freaking out about it. But on the other side, it provides a lot of opportunity. And some of the players, some of the companies that you use every day, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, are investing billions in these categories. So what is programmatic? I've thrown that word out a bunch of times. So it's very simply the act of using software platforms to buy and manage advertising campaigns. So think of like E-Trade, right? If you're using E-Trade to buy and sell stocks, you can do the same thing with advertising space. I know it sounds weird, but essentially shaking up the advertising space, there are platforms now where you can buy and sell space in real time. You can buy ad space and then you can flip it and sell it for more money. Ad networks. So people are drawing parallels in the advertising space to the financial sector. Here's an example of the platforms I alluded to. So on the right there, you have what is essentially kind of the E-Trade for advertising. So people are going in and they're bidding on space. They're bidding on users. So as you're browsing the web, right, someone is bidding on you, your user session in real time and saying, you know, how valuable is this user? What do they like? You know, what do they eat? What do they buy? And then they're bidding on you and flipping an ad in real time. On the left here, you kind of have the Amazon version of advertising buying and selling, which is like a shopping cart. And so what these two things do is it doesn't take out the human element. So a lot of people that are scared are sales reps and people like that. It doesn't take out the human element per se. There's always going to be that creative aspect to advertising, right? Where you have the Don Drapers or whatever, and we're hanging out in the office, laying on the couch, drinking, coming up with ideas. It just allows for more of that to happen. It's by leveraging platforms like this, it's going to be more conducive to more creative and strategic thinking. So really what this process automation and all this stuff helps achieve is it cuts down on the mundane, the tedious. The way we used to do things in advertising was we fax over a form, someone signs it, they send it back, then we sign it, then we make a couple copies, everyone's got their copies of the contract, right? This stuff is all done within the system now. And so instead of these emails back and forth, it could be 70 touch points and 15 people that need to sign off on a campaign. It pops up in the system. We get automated emails. You can take a look real quick, and if you approve, you click check and submit. You're good. And it's just an e-signature now. So, like I said, there are opportunities in this space, and hopefully, now tying it back and making it more relevant to you. So the opportunity. Really just want to illustrate how much money there is at stake. So year over year, how much people are spending in data-based advertising and programmatic advertising is increasing exponentially, right? So there's billions upon billions of dollars being spent here. And these two charts, I haven't looked at them recently, but one's US and one is, I think one's focused on video, but either way. Essentially, this is year over year, 2011, 2017, 2012 to 2017. More and more money is being dumped into this space. So companies that you're used to using every day, Facebook, for example, their market cap is over $200 billion, right? They're dumping millions, billions into buying these platforms, right? You've never heard of these. They're not consumer facing, but they're ad tech platforms. That's what Facebook is putting their money into. They do cool stuff like buying the Oculus Rift or whatever, but that's years away, right? How they make their money right now is through this, right? So that's how they're making their money. And so these platforms essentially allow you, again, to target the right consumers. And that's why Facebook is valued more, because they have everyone on their platform. They know what you buy. They know what you do. And they're able to push ads that are more relevant to you. So companies like Bank of America, whoever, they're going to dump their money here because they know it's going to the right people as opposed to complete waste. Amazon's another example. So Amazon's what, $178 billion in market cap. They rely on data processing and they analyze terabytes of data. This is their ad platform that we're talking about, right? So we all know Amazon has a ton of consumer data, et cetera. They're applying that to advertising. So this is the kind of stuff that the shareholders see in their annual meetings and stuff like that, and that's why people are investing in these companies, because they have the data, right? And so these companies are looking to hire people who understand data, can work with it, can ensure its security, et cetera, et cetera. Oracle's another example. They bought the company I used to work for. They bought another company that I used to partner with. And they're almost $200 billion market cap. So these guys are dumping tons of money into this space, right? And even if you discount these companies, right, there's still the private equity and the venture cap space, right? So all those little companies that I showed before, they're popping up every day, right? And these companies are going to eat them up, to try and stop the competition. So the opportunity is huge, right? Just specifically in advertising. I mean, these are companies or divisions that you've never heard of because they're not consumer facing. And this was surprising to me when I came into this space. I was like, to be quite honest, I got a little lucky by just picking digital advertising. And it was something that when I came out of school, there was no minor or major, anything focused on this. There are programs now focused around it, but essentially it's a huge opportunity. There's a lot of money on the table. These are other examples of guys you've heard of, or maybe not, who are dumping millions and billions of dollars into data-oriented marketing and advertising. So that's all the content I have, not too much, but hopefully some of it made sense. I know it's not all entirely relevant to you guys, but again, just trying to illustrate, the fact that something that you wouldn't typically think of when you think of startups is advertising and advertising technology. So there's hundreds, thousands of startups popping up all the time in advertising, and so it's kind of to me, it was a hidden gem kind of situation because, like I said, when you think of startups, you think of consumer-facing products, which are most of the people coming in here, this week, right? HomeJoy, I use that in New York, but these are companies that you wouldn't even think of, right? When you think of Facebook, you think of I'm going on to post photos, whatever. But there's a whole back end to it. There's a whole advertising division that's huge. So. Hopefully that made sense and was somewhat interesting. Yep.
Yeah, I have a question. Our class is normally concerned with information security management.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything about how they secure the tons of consumer data?
Yeah, I mean, Datalogix was pretty aggressive with it. We had a separate. We basically housed the data in different locations. So, I mean, my understanding of how the security worked was limited. I just know I wasn't allowed to go in half of the places in the building. So I know I was in an area having a meeting with, a big client. It was General Motors, I think. And someone came by and they were like, "Who the hell is this guy?" No. Excuse me, who are you? Why are you in here? So the security was a huge factor. Again, the actual, mechanics of how we were securing things, I'm fairly unfamiliar with. I do know that for all of that data matching that I explained, we had data scientists in at Datalogix that we hired that I was telling Hermes, I couldn't understand half the things they were telling me. I was just trying to absorb it and be able to regurgitate it to, whoever I met with. But yeah, I think, the people that we brought in ex-NASA guy, we brought in a guy who set up a lot of the infrastructure for Comcast, and they were talking about our security. So essentially when we bring in that personally identifiable information, so your first name, your last name, your email address, and your household address, and then whatever transactions, there was a hash that went on, right? So we brought the data in and it just became incoherent garbage. And essentially there's a key code for that, right? And so that key code was held by someone like Facebook, for example. And so Facebook was able to make the match on their side. Other partners, we would make the matches in-house. So we would take in someone's user base, and then we would take in the transactional data, and we were that kind of middleman who made those matches. So we would bring in Walmart's transactional data, and then we would merge it with Yahoo, right? And then we would spit out a user ID that said, user ABC123, buys 6 boxes of cereal a month and drives a minivan. So they fall into the soccer moms category or whatever. So yeah, we had these cute little names for each of them. But Facebook, for example, did not allow us to do that. We had to send the data to them so they could make the match because they're super important and awesome. So them and Google were the only two who wouldn't allow us to do the match within our walls. But we had to go through these huge security audits. I remember tried to bring on American Express as a client. They sent a team of guys in to essentially try and break through our systems internally. They would sit in the server room for days, and then they would try and hack us externally. So there were huge security audit processes that went on. And so a company like Datalogix or Axiom or all these database management companies, Oracle, whatever, they're hugely in need of people who understand this a lot better than I do. Yeah, so you can make some decent money if you get it and want to go do it. Yeah.
Do you find that when you go in and speak to your clients, is this sort of an easy sell? Just because I'm thinking, data is so general, any of it has value now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You read big data now, and yeah, we got all this data, but we don't know what to do with it now. So I think a lot of people were just gathering, and they were just because it was a buzzword, right? And so when I threw up that one slide that said data and automation, last year in 2014, the buzzword of the year was programmatic, and the year before that, it was data. And they actually flipped places both years. So data and automation were the buzzwords. So people were just running around saying, oh, I need whatever data. It doesn't matter. I just need it. And some of them weren't even vetting the quality of it. And at first, the sell, it was easy to talk about it. Well, when I did it 4.5 years ago, people had no idea what the hell I was talking about. They were like, I went over because I was with another company who had ad dollars to spend. And I looked at this and I was like, this makes perfect sense. Like, you run a campaign and then you know whether someone bought something or not. That's great. But explaining it to other people, they were like, well, I don't really care. Like, my job's really easy right now. I just throw ads online. I don't give a shit who bought whatever. So, it was tough sell at first. Once data became a real hot topic buzzword, it was easy. I just came in and was like, we partner with Facebook. And they're like, cool, I want to meet with you. And that was one of the reasons I left at the end, because my stock was vested. And a lot of the foundational work I did, project management, strategic partnerships, wasn't really necessary anymore. I had basically built those partnerships, or the rest of the company did. It wasn't just me. Built those partnerships, and name dropping Facebook made it easy, and so it wasn't a challenge anymore. So yeah, it was kind of overly easy at that point, and looking for a car payment. So yeah, it was pretty easy towards the end there, and people are just. There are a lot of people, like, I'll give you some examples. Kraft, they know their stuff inside and out. They're really, really solid. But then there are some other advertisers who are just kind of mailing it in, and they're just taking these meetings for buzzwords. And they don't understand what to do with the data or why they need it. So yeah, it's interesting. You have to explain to them the opportunities that exist with the data, right? I think there is an overload of how much is available. Yeah. Go ahead.
When you look at services like AdBlock and AdBlock Plus, I'm not sure exactly how substantial that is of an effect on you.
It's a problem. Yeah.
Where do you see advertising moving in the future that would kind of move around those services or integrate better with content?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I actually went out west for client meetings for my current job. Yeah. Oh, his question was around AdBlock and AdBlock Plus, which essentially, makes it so that no ads show up, which kind of destroys my business, which is an issue. But yeah, so workarounds, we don't have anything kind of figured out yet. But the people in advertising, like I said, there's a lot of money in it. So where there's a lot of money, people figure things out. I have a friend who actually, when I was out west taking client meetings with the auto manufacturers, selling Conde Nast, doing what I'm supposed to be doing, in case anyone's seeing this, met with some friends, friends ex-Amazon guys, ex-Google guys, who I've known for years, and one of them basically said, oh, remember this guy Ben, he's working on something to kind of fix the ad block space. I know some of the other, there are other routes for advertising. So there's what's called native advertising, which is, it's a fine line between a workaround and trickery. And so you have to walk that line. So like people like Vice do it very well. Vox Media does it well. I think we do it well at Conde, which is essentially kind of intertwining advertising into the content itself and making it so that it's sponsored content, whatever it may be. Because I feel like, I'm going to sound like I'm old here by saying this, but people like my brother, for example, he's a heavy Reddit user, and he feels that there should be, there's an exchange of value, right? So if my brother's gonna get hit with ads, he wants something in return. So it was kind of interesting, because back in the day, you're being advertised to, that's just how it works. Now it's like, no, I want something back. And so things that work really well are sponsorships, you know, sweepstakes, that kind of stuff. Or like I said, sponsored content. So getting the feeling that like, hey, I'm gonna get 30 minutes of free viewing, whatever, because I watched this ad beforehand. And so that's one way around it, is just getting away from the standard banners, because there's something called banner blindness is a term we use in the industry, which is essentially just, you automatically look here because you know there's an ad here and here. And so you just automatically look away from those things. And so we're looking for bigger, more beautiful executions. We're looking for ways to intertwine the ads into the content. So those are kind of our, attempts at workarounds right now. Someone's developing a technology, which I'm like, I'm not sure you're just gonna override the ad blocker, because that's not good. If somebody opted out of it in the first place, you wanna respect that opt-out. And so I think there's another way of working around it, which is essentially just kind of pivoting. And so that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the issues with, I'm a personal user of an ad block program, but I also whitelist other websites, for example Reddit, because advertisements on Reddit tend to not be annoying, they aren't intrusive.
Yeah, they're really good at that. Yeah.
So I feel like if other companies move towards a direction where their advertisements were less intrusive, less annoying, where they weren't playing sounds the moment you open a web page and you have to figure out where's the sound coming from, how do I shut it off?
Yep.
A lot ad blockers would be decreased in usage, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. I think when I first came out of school, people were like, what do you do? And I'm like, I do ad trafficking for this website. And they're like, oh, pop-ups. Like, it gets a bad rap. And like you said, because of a few bad players in the space, or a few bad actors or whatever, you have these non-user initiated kind of experiences where the sound just plays or the video just starts, and it's obnoxious. That could have been what happened over there, I'm not sure. It just started playing. And so, it creates a bad user experience. And to your point, Reddit is great at understanding their user base. And so, like I said, we work with them, and I was talking to one of the guys over at Reddit, and he said, we can't take this on, it's too cookie cutter. It needs to resonate within our user base, and they need to feel like this is actually relevant to them. And so I think a lot of what I was explaining before, the application of data and understanding your audience and getting them the right message to the right person is really important. And I think that's something that, for example, AMC in TV, I think does a good job of that. And I don't think in TV anyone really does it well, but I think AMC does a pretty good job. Their content's interesting, but the advertisers that they have in there are usually relevant to whatever you're watching. Like, I see the ads, I'm like, okay, that's actually something that makes sense for me. But yeah, it's definitely something that we've circulated in what's called the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, which is like just a group of people from different companies, and we all meet once a month, and that's been brought up before. It's like, well, wait, if we don't have annoying experiences, people won't block us as much. So it's definitely a valid point. Yep. Yep.
So how is policy and legality of being able to sell customer data or transacting across different domains? So you mentioned earlier that you're taking customer transactional data and then basically data mining it to get a user ID. How is that not a breach of confidentiality?
Yeah, so like I said before, I mean, it's a totally valid question as well. Like I said before, the PII, the identifiable information that we're getting from people it's opt-in, but not explicitly opt-in. So I'll give you an example. When you get, like I used before, the credit card example, we can use that one. When I'm applying for a credit card, there's a bunch of legal jargon. In there, it explains to you that your data can and will be used for marketing purposes. If you redline that and send it back to Amex, they're gonna say, you don't get a credit card. So it's kind of, it's always happened. And actually, I think when we come out in the digital space and start talking about things, people get scared. I think because they get this big brother feeling of someone watching them online. But this stuff has been going on in direct mail forever. So your data has been used. That's why you get those pamphlets in the mail. It's expensive to send those pamphlets and those books, right? And so the company that I was at, Datalogics, was called Next Action. It was all print oriented. So when you get that catalog from whatever Bloomingdale's in the mail, that costs them $5 to send, right? Like via the post on it and the binding and the printing of the product. So the accuracy is super important there. And so they've always been using data to send you those. We're merely taking that and pivoting it into online. That said, there are a lot of people who are worried about it. So there are a bunch of precautions besides things like ad blocker. There's opt-outs. You can go to, there are a couple data-oriented websites, and it essentially explains like, hey, we use data to target you. If you don't want this to occur, you can opt out of it. But then you're still gonna get ads. They're just not gonna be tailored based on data. So yeah, a lot of people get concerned about that, but I think we're moving away from it. You know, as the younger generation, you know, comes up, you know, everyone starts to realize that it's a digital era. You can protect your information and your data. You can control that. But at the end of the day, if it's being used for marketing purposes, I mean, what's the real harm, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm of the philosophy that the government's watching us anyway, so. I mean, how bad is it that Bank of America is watching me? I don't know. But yeah, definitely a valid concern, and there are ways to opt out of that data application. And as far as the legality of use, it varies by country. Germany, for example, you can't do any of this. London, you can, or the UK, you can. It depends on each country. In the US, we're fairly lax with it, but there's a lot of regulation around it. There's something called the NAI, and there's the DMA. So these are all organizations that essentially, you know, govern what we're doing with the data, and we try to cut down on those bad actors, right? Yep.
Okay, that kind of begs the question. You may not know this, but has the government come and asked to have access to the marketing data?
Yeah. So they've tried to regulate the ad technology landscape a couple of times now. The argument, so I haven't heard about it lately, but at the conferences about 2 years ago, everything people were talking about was, oh, there's this ongoing battle in DC about can we gather this data and can we use it in the way that we are using it? Because people were nervous. There were a few bad people out there who it wasn't clear whether they were collecting the data in a safe way, and whether they were using it in the way they were supposed to. And so essentially those organizations I mentioned, DMA, NAI, IAB, there's like 5 of them, essentially went and pitched DC and said, we will self-govern. We will govern ourselves, and we will have people get certified in these organizations, right? And if people step outside those lines, you know, we'll essentially banish them and we'll feed them up to you, and you can shut them down accordingly. But I think the self-governing has gone pretty well so far, but I'm sure if we misstep, the government will come back in and regulate us. I think they're focused on finance right now, you know, still fixing that, but.
But other than regulation, have they ever asked for access to the data?
I don't know.
If I were NSA,
Might be above my pay grade.
I would want access to that so I could data mine it, combine it with Google data, Yahoo data, and so on.
Sure. I mean, they probably see how much money Google's making, and in theory, right, I don't know the answer to your question, but in theory, if I was the government, I'd do it, make some money off of it. But then again, if I was the government, I'd legalize marijuana, so make just for the money purposes, right? So simple economics. But yeah, no, I don't know the answer to that. You know, there are a lot of other data companies out there, and from what I know, they didn't with my old company. But again, that could have been totally above my pay grade. I was just a grunt over there. So yeah, yeah.
How does the right to be forgotten in European law now govern or change digital advertising over there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our targeting capabilities are pretty limited now. And so I'm not sure what the workaround is for that. I've been to a couple of conferences in Copenhagen and Berlin, and you know, luckily I'm not at data logics anymore when I'm speaking at these events, because otherwise I'd be asked that question and I have no idea how to answer it. But for someone like us with Conde, we're just trying to say, okay, we're going to focus on contextual relevance then. And so when you're on Wired, we're going to serve you up tech-oriented brands and so on and so forth. And when you're on GQ, we're going to serve you fashion stuff. I don't know what the answer to that is. It's I guess from a consumer perspective, great, sure, like you're more protected, but I think it's cutting into our business, just like the ad blocker thing is cutting into our business and things like that. So the other problem that we have to solve, which is I think even greater than this, is mobile in general. So half of our traffic comes from mobile devices, yet, I don't know, 10, 15%, I'm ballparking, revenue comes from mobile devices. So something's got to give there. As our traffic goes more mobile, we can't just make less money. That's not going to work. So we need to figure out how to make mobile environments that are actually interesting and compelling. And I think mobile development and application of data in the mobile environment is a huge opportunity in this space. And I think right now the only guys who are kind of figuring it out are the usual suspects: Facebook, Google, Verizon, because they have, you either have them as a carrier or they have apps that you give all your information to. So for someone like us, mobile's a big challenge. And so while the European data thing is interesting, it's less of a focus for us right now. And right now our primary focus is figuring out mobile. Yep.
So I did want to, I've been monitoring our text in questions feed here, and I wanted to pose a couple of them to you.
Sure.
This may be a little bit from earlier in the talk, but we have a question here. Was there an additional charge for companies that wanted to do their own analysis and matching on the data you provided? So if we jump back to the...
Wait, say it again, sorry.
So when you were talking about when you provide companies with data that they can analyze in certain ways to support their business functions, you mentioned a lot of times that's something that those analytics services are ones that you provide, and then other times the companies receiving that data want to handle that themselves. How do you deal with that?
For the most part, there are set rules as far as who can handle the data, and that depends on the audit, right? So, for example, the Facebook relationship, and again, I can't speak to this too much, it wasn't my account, but from what I understand, and a lot of this is public knowledge, but like you could probably dig it up somewhere, but Facebook wanted to have more control over their users and how the data is applied, so there was a walled garden within Facebook, and essentially, the information was hashed and sent over, and then Facebook would do the matching. But for the most part, no one's going to have the power or the sway to be able to do something like that. It's isolated cases, and in advertising as a whole, when I worked at agencies and things like that, everyone signed our paperwork, right? Everyone signed whatever ad agency's paperwork. They didn't sign, we didn't sign some other random technology company we worked with. The only ones that we signed were Google's. You know what I mean? So it was like, it's usually whoever's the hegemon or whatever in the industry is the one who decides how process is going to work. So, I mean, like how that data gets handled, it was almost always by like our company, with a very few exceptions. Yeah, and the exceptions were made based on people who were just monsters. So, yeah.
So another question for you, and feel free if we have more questions from the audience too. So your brand profile is very diverse, as you've shown us. Can you speak a little bit more about the challenges that may present in terms of from a management perspective? So not just the nature of the services that your company provides, but just in terms of managing all of that activity. What are some of the difficulties that arise because of all these?
Oh, so specifically, the magazine company Conde Nast, yeah, like Vogue, GQ, Wired. So yeah, I think the company's pivoting, like I said, to become a digital company, and they're hiring a lot in software engineering and areas like that, web dev. We had, I'll give you one example, and this is something that I don't think is sensitive. I think the company is making it fairly public knowledge. We had a lot of fragmentation, as you can imagine. All of those different titles are treated as their own business. or they treat themselves as their own business, right? So Glamour sees themselves as having their own P&L, and they got to make their number, and that's that. I think now the company is pivoting towards more of a, you know, kind of a centralized focus. And the example that I want to give is each title had their own kind of CMS setup, and it wasn't centralized and it wasn't organized. And I think now that we're pivoting as a company, we have a new chief digital officer, and he has mandated that, hey, we're all going to use the same technology and get on the same page. Because it was just kind of, and it sounds basic, it sounds fundamental, but it's something that a lot of these companies face. So like Hearst is one of our biggest competitors. They have Cosmo, Esquire. They have the same problem, massive fragmentation. So any of these companies, Gannett is a huge newspaper company. They have fragmentation. So I think some of these bigger companies realize that Facebook and Google and Twitter and Snapchat are impeding on their, you know, they're coming in on their territory, right? And they're losing money to these other huge digital players. And so they have to you know, kind of come together. Back in the day, the print magazines, they're like, screw it, we compete with each other, right? Like Glamour and Vogue competed with each other under the Conde umbrella. But I think now we're realizing that, hey, there are other bigger enemies out there. And so we need to, you know, come together and get organized. So there are challenges, anything from sales and business development. You have different teams out in the market. There are challenges from technology, like the CMS example. So I think, you know, with a company like that, you have all these different brands, and it is a huge challenge. So it's definitely a valid point, and I think we're getting better at it. It's my best answer. We're not there yet, but yeah.
So I have one final question for Rick, but anything else we want to pose to him first? So we're asking all of our Startup Week speakers this week if they can sort of share what their perceptions are of the next big trend in your industry. So your whole presentation was about how programmatic is the new trend in advertising, but within the programmatic space, is there anything else you can share about trends for the future?
And I think it's, you know, I'm starting to look, ad technology is like all I know, and it's all I've done since school. And I like it, and I think I want to stay in it, but when I was out west talking with some friends, they were saying deep linking. And I'm like, okay, explain that. They just say it, deep linking. So they're talking about the app space, right? And I think this is something that's not necessarily ad tech focused, so I'm kind of not answering your question, sorry. But I think that's interesting. The app space is due for disruption. So when you go into the app market, I can't ever find what I want, and it's super frustrating. Random stuff comes up that I didn't search for. There's no real like synergistic, relationship between the apps. So when you're navigating from app to app, you have to go into one and then back out and then back into the new app. There's no kind of interlinking like there is with standard websites, right? You can go from one to the other very easily. The user experience is simple. In the app space, this is a problem. So there are some companies out there doing what's called deep linking and essentially focused on kind of fixing the app market in general. So I think that's cool outside of ad technology. Within ad technology, within my space, video's huge because we're trying to cut into that TV pool. The continued evolution of data is interesting. And then this topic of programmatic, which is essentially just the automation of tedious processes and being able to manage all of your stuff within one dashboard. So kind of streamlining workflow. So there are a few different hot things within advertising. And I would say it'll continue to be data, it'll continue to be programmatic and automation. And I don't see anything on the horizon that's too new or interesting. These things are still so immature. They've only been going on for a few years. So I think it'll just kind of continue to be the same stuff for the next few years. But, yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'll ask one more time for final questions, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so I have a couple of announcements to share with you. This session was live cast, as you know, as all of our speaker sessions this week have been. For those of you, if there's anyone in the audience who's concerned about footage from this session being used for future Startup Week promotional purposes, I would just ask that you come talk to me at the end. We'll try to work that out. And then the... So other thing, for those of you who may have taken photos throughout the session or at any other session during the week, Please do share those on Instagram and Twitter using the IST Startup hashtag. It's the same one as what was written up on the board here. And that's about it from me. So thank you all for showing up today, and thank you, Rick, of course, if we can give him a round of applause.